There comes a moment in every woman's life where she realizes that waiting for someone to come and save her is no longer an option, that the pieces of her life scattered around her are not signs of defeat, but raw material for a powerful rebirth. In that quiet place of isolation, where pain echoes louder than applause and the world cannot see the silent battles she fights, something unexplainable begins to awaken. It is in the rebuilding season, when no one notices the effort, when every step forward feels heavier than the last, that a woman discovers the depth of her resilience and the unstoppable fire within her. This journey is not about proving anything to the world, but about rising for herself, reclaiming her worth, rebuilding her identity, and stepping into a version of herself that is not defined by what broke her, but by what she chose to become after the breaking. There is a different kind of strength that is born when a woman decides to rebuild her life without waiting for applause or validation. It is a quiet decision, often made in the middle of the night when her soul is tired and her heart is heavy from carrying untold battles. No one sees the moment she wipes her own tears and whispers to herself that quitting is not an option. No one hears the inner dialogue where she reminds herself that even though she did not choose the pain, she will choose what to do with it. Choosing to rebuild in silence is one of the bravest things a woman can ever do, because it means choosing growth over comfort, healing over bitterness, and purpose over pain. It means walking forward without a crowd cheering, without a hand to hold, without anyone affirming her strength. It is looking at the broken pieces of her life and deciding that they will not be wasted. It is understanding that sometimes the most powerful chapters of transformation are written in private, not on stages, not on timelines, not in front of audiences who only celebrate polished victories, but know nothing about the messy process behind them. Choosing to rebuild without clapping means accepting that the process will be slow and lonely at times. It means embracing the silence not as punishment, but as protection, a sacred space where she can hear her own heartbeat again, where she can rediscover the sound of her own voice without the noise of opinions and expectations. In that silence, she learns to become her own encourager. She learns to clap for herself when no one else does. She learns to recognize progress even when it feels invisible. She learns to celebrate small victories that no one knows about, like getting out of bed on a day when grief tried to paralyze her, like choosing peace instead of reacting to every wound, like forgiving herself for the times she settled for less than she deserved. These small victories are not loud, but they are powerful. They are the bricks she lays one by one as she rebuilds her life from the ground up. Rebuilding without applause also means breaking free from the need to be seen. It is understanding that true transformation is not always visible to others at first. The world often celebrates outcomes but rarely honors processes. They love the glow up but ignore the nights of breaking and rebuilding that came before it. But a woman who rebuilds herself alone begins to understand that she does not need the world to acknowledge her journey for it to be valid. She does not need likes or claps to confirm her progress. Her strength is not measured by external reactions, but by the internal shifts happening in her soul. And as she keeps choosing to rebuild, something changes in her posture. She stands a little taller. She breathes a little deeper. She begins to see hope in places where only despair once lived. She stops waiting for someone to rescue her because she realizes she has become her own rescue. She stops waiting for someone to choose her because she has finally chosen herself. Each day she shows up for herself becomes a declaration that her story is not over. Every step forward, no matter how small, becomes an act of rebellion against every force that tried to break her. She becomes unshakable not because life got easier, but because she discovered the power of standing alone and still rising. She starts to understand that applause is temporary, but self-belief is eternal. Standing in that realization, she becomes a woman who rebuilds without needing permission, a woman who rises without needing to be seen, a woman who knows that the most unstoppable power is found not in being celebrated, but in choosing to rise again, even when no one is watching. Transforming silent pain into personal power is a journey that begins in the unseen places of the heart, where wounds are not always visible but deeply felt. It is easy to appear strong on the outside while carrying a storm within, to function in daily life while quietly battling emotions that threaten to drown the soul. Pain carried in silence can feel like a weight pressing against the chest, a heaviness that others don't acknowledge because they cannot see it. Yet within that silence lies the potential for incredible transformation. Pain can either become a prison that traps a woman in cycles of fear and self-doubt, or it can become the very fire that refines her into a stronger, wiser, more powerful version of herself. The difference is not in the pain itself, but in how she chooses to respond to it. There comes a point where she stops viewing her suffering as a curse and begins to see it as a teacher. Silent pain teaches her how to stand without needing support, how to breathe through moments of anxiety, how to speak life over herself when the world speaks doubt. It teaches her resilience, not the kind that is loud and defiant, but the kind that is steady and unshakable. In silence, she begins to understand that pain is not always an enemy. Sometimes it is an invitation to grow beyond what she thought she could handle. Silent pain strips away illusions and distractions, forcing her to confront who she really is beneath her titles, roles, and expectations. It pushes her into a place of self-reflection where she begins to ask deeper questions. What do I truly want? What am I afraid of? Where am I still giving away my power? These questions are not comfortable, but they are necessary for transformation. Pain has a way of revealing the parts of herself she once ignored. It exposes where she settled, where she lost her voice, where she abandoned her own needs to keep the peace. And in that revelation, she finds clarity. She begins to see that power is not just about strength. It is about alignment with truth. Transforming pain into power does not mean pretending the pain never existed. It means acknowledging it, feeling it, and then deciding not to live there. It is the moment she realizes that her pain can either become her narrative or her catalyst. Instead of saying, "This broke me," she begins to say, "This built me." Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" she starts to ask, "What is this trying to teach me?" That shift in perspective is where power begins. Silent pain also teaches her how to protect her energy. She learns that not everyone deserves access to her vulnerability. She becomes selective about who she allows into her healing space. She stops oversharing her struggles with people who only want to hear stories of her brokenness, but are not invested in her breakthrough. She understands that transformation is sacred work, and not everyone is qualified to witness it. She learns to process her emotions privately, to heal inwardly, so that when she steps forward, she does so from a place of restoration, not desperation. Power formed in silence is different from power gained through validation. It is not dependent on applause or recognition. It comes from surviving lonely nights, crying in secret, praying when it felt like no answers were coming, and still choosing to show up the next day. It comes from rebuilding her confidence piece by piece, learning to trust herself again after being disappointed, hurt, or betrayed. Silent pain, when embraced with intention, becomes the fuel for a new identity. She stops seeing herself as a victim of circumstances and begins to see herself as the author of her next chapter. She walks differently, not because life became easier, but because she became stronger. People around her might not notice the shift at first. They may not understand how someone who once felt so broken can now carry such quiet authority. But power gained in silence does not need to announce itself. It is felt, not performed. It radiates from her presence, speaks through her eyes, and moves through her decisions. She no longer reacts to everything that tries to provoke her because she understands that true power is not in reacting, but in choosing where to place her energy. Silent pain, once transformed, becomes a fire that burns away insecurity, fear, and timidity. What remains is a woman who knows that everything she went through was not wasted. Every tear watered the seeds of her becoming. Every heartbreak stretched her capacity to love herself deeper. Every moment of being overlooked taught her that she does not need to be seen to be significant. Becoming your own source of validation and strength is one of the most liberating transformations a woman can experience. For so long, she may have looked to others to affirm her worth, waiting for someone to say she is enough, hoping that approval from people would quiet the insecurities inside her. Validation from others feels comforting at first, like a warm light that tells her she is seen, appreciated, and valued. But as time passes, she begins to notice that external validation is inconsistent. One moment people praise her, and the next moment they forget her efforts. One day they cheer for her success, and the next day they move on without acknowledging her growth. The unpredictability of their approval becomes exhausting. She finds herself trapped in a cycle of performance, constantly doing more, giving more, achieving more just to keep their applause from fading. That cycle eventually leads her to a moment of realization. She understands that if her confidence depends on the reactions of others, then she will always be a prisoner to their opinions. She begins to ask herself a difficult but necessary question. What happens if the applause stops? Who am I if no one is watching? This moment becomes the beginning of her inner awakening. She starts to recognize the subtle ways she abandoned herself just to feel accepted. She remembers times when she silenced her truth to make others comfortable, when she shrunk her personality so she would not be misunderstood, when she dimmed her light because shining too brightly made others uncomfortable. In trying to be enough for everyone else, she forgot to be enough for herself. The moment she sees this clearly, something shifts inside her. She begins to withdraw her energy from chasing approval and starts investing it into building inner peace. She stops waiting for people to notice her worth and chooses to acknowledge it herself. At first, it feels strange to speak life over herself, to cheer for herself in moments where she once waited for someone else to do it. But with each affirmation she whispers over her soul, she begins to feel a strength rising within her that does not depend on public recognition. Being her own source of validation means she learns how to be proud of herself quietly. She learns to celebrate small victories, even if no one else sees them. She recognizes that healing is progress, setting boundaries is progress, saying no to what drains her is progress, choosing rest without guilt is progress. She no longer dismisses her growth just because it is not loud or dramatic. She starts honoring her journey even in its slow seasons. Becoming her own strength also means she learns how to sit with herself in silence without feeling empty. In that silence, she finds clarity. She discovers what peace truly feels like when it is not tied to anyone else's behavior. She learns that solitude is not loneliness, but a sacred space where she can realign with her purpose, where she can hear her own thoughts without the echo of others' opinions. Her confidence begins to evolve. It is no longer a loud confidence that needs to be seen, but a grounded confidence that cannot be shaken. This kind of confidence does not seek to prove anything. It simply exists. It shows up in the way she carries herself, the way she speaks, the way she moves through life with quiet assurance. She no longer feels pressured to explain her decisions or defend her choices to people who do not understand her vision. She realizes that she does not need everyone to agree with her as long as she stands in alignment with her truth. As she continues to become her own source of strength, she notices how her energy changes. She stops overgiving in spaces where her presence is not valued. She stops tolerating half-hearted connections that leave her feeling unseen. She stops begging for support from people who only show up when it benefits them. Instead, she becomes deeply selective about where she pours her love, her time, and her attention. She begins to surround herself with peace rather than noise, with authenticity rather than validation, with purpose rather than performance. Being her own validation does not mean she no longer appreciates support from others. It simply means her identity is no longer built on it. Encouragement becomes an addition, not a requirement. Compliments become a blessing, not a necessity. She learns to say, I love me even when no one is clapping. I believe in me even when no one understands. I choose me even when others don't. In that declaration, she steps into a new season of power. She is no longer waiting to be chosen. She is choosing herself, rising above judgment, expectations, and loneliness requires a different kind of inner strength, a strength that is not loud, but deeply rooted in self-awareness. There comes a moment when a woman realizes that the world will always have something to say about who she is, how she should live, and what she should become. People form opinions based on fragments of her story, unaware of the parts they cannot see. Some judge her because she is too strong. Others judge her because she is too soft. Some expect her to move on too quickly, while others expect her to stay broken longer. She begins to realize that living for the approval of others is a losing battle because their expectations constantly shift. In that realization, she starts to detach her worth from their opinions. She understands that judgment often comes from people who have never carried her battles, never cried her tears, and never walked through her lonely seasons. They see outcomes, but not the process. They see survival, but not the fight it took to still be standing. Rising above their judgment means understanding that not everyone deserves an explanation. She learns that silence is not weakness, it is wisdom. Instead of defending herself to people committed to misunderstanding her, she chooses to conserve her energy and redirect it toward building the life she envisions. Expectations from others can feel like chains, especially when she is trying to rebuild herself. There is pressure to heal quickly, to smile through pain, to act strong when she is still learning how to breathe again. But she learns that healing is not a performance. She is allowed to take her time, to move at her own pace, to rediscover herself without racing against someone else's timeline. She stops apologizing for not being who others want her to be and embraces who she truly is becoming. The moment she releases the weight of their expectations, she feels a freedom she has never known. She begins to live intentionally instead of reactively. She makes decisions based on her peace, not their applause. She follows purpose instead of popularity. This shift in perspective sets her apart, and in that separation, loneliness sometimes follows. But loneliness is not always a sign of being abandoned. Sometimes it is a sign of being elevated. She learns that elevation often requires isolation, not because she is unworthy of companionship, but because certain transitions require clarity, and clarity rarely comes in crowded spaces. In loneliness, she finds an opportunity to reconnect with herself. During these quiet seasons, she confronts feelings she once avoided. She acknowledges the ache of being misunderstood, the sting of being judged, and the emptiness that comes from outgrowing environments that once felt comfortable. She learns that healing is not just about moving forward, it is about making peace with the parts of her journey that did not go as planned. She begins to see loneliness not as a punishment, but as a sacred invitation to discover new layers of her identity. In that solitude, she finds her voice again, a voice that is no longer shaped by fear but by conviction. Rising above judgment also means refusing to let bitterness grow in her heart. She understands that carrying resentment toward those who doubted her only weighs her down. She starts to detach emotionally from the need to be understood by everyone. Instead, she becomes more focused on understanding herself. She replaces the question, "Why don't they see me?" with a more empowering one, "Why do I keep needing them to?" That shift liberates her from emotional dependency. She begins to trust her intuition more, realizing that every time she silenced her inner voice to meet others' expectations, she abandoned her own wisdom. As she rises above judgment and expectations, she stops shrinking herself to avoid being talked about. She understands that being misunderstood is often a sign that she is moving in a direction others cannot comprehend. She embraces that not everyone will applaud her healing, not everyone will celebrate her transformation. And not everyone is meant to accompany her into her next chapter. Instead of clinging to connections that drain her, she preserves her energy for the life she is building. She walks with quiet confidence, knowing that her worth is not up for debate. She no longer responds to every opinion because she has learned that peace is more valuable than being right. She moves gracefully, unbothered by the noise, focused on becoming. Turning rock bottom into the foundation of a new identity is a powerful decision born not out of comfort but out of necessity. When everything familiar has crumbled and the life once imagined feels out of reach, there comes a moment when a woman stands face to face with the reality that she cannot go back to who she used to be. Rock bottom feels like an ending, a place where hope seems distant and strength seems far away. But in that stillness, in that moment when she has nothing left to lose, she finds something she never expected to discover: clarity. Rock bottom strips away illusions. It removes the distractions, the noise, the pretending. It reveals who truly cares and who only showed up when things were easy. It exposes what was real and what was temporary. In that exposure, she begins to see truth more clearly. She realizes that the life she was holding on to was not always aligned with who she was meant to become. Pain has a way of breaking what was never meant to stay. In that breaking, she begins to understand that rock bottom is not just a place of loss, but a place of revelation. Instead of seeing it as the end, she chooses to see it as a new beginning. From that low place, she starts to rebuild, not with the fragile materials of old validation, forced relationships, and false strength, but with honesty, resilience, and self-awareness. Rock bottom teaches her that survival is not the goal, transformation is. Anyone can survive something painful, but choosing to rise from it with a renewed mind and a new identity takes intentionality. She stops asking for life to return to what it used to be because she understands that what she is building now will be stronger, wiser, and more aligned with her purpose than anything she has known before. Rock bottom has a unique way of teaching her to rely on inner strength she did not know she had. When no one else can carry her, she learns how to carry herself. When encouragement is nowhere to be found, she learns how to speak life over her own soul. When hope feels distant, she learns how to create it from within. In that process, she begins to develop a new identity, one that is not rooted in what she has lost, but in what she is becoming. This new identity is formed in the quiet spaces of determination. It is built in moments when she decides to stand even when her legs feel weak, when she decides to believe even when everything looks uncertain. Rock bottom teaches her discipline. It teaches her to rise early, to fight through mental battles, to choose faith over fear. It reminds her that every step forward, no matter how small, is progress. She begins to track her growth not by how far she is from pain, but by how much stronger she feels within. She becomes intentional about her healing, realizing that if she is going to rebuild, she wants to do it with purpose. She no longer clings to things that drain her spirit. She refuses to return to patterns that broke her. She becomes protective of her energy because she knows how hard it was to recover it. She starts saying no without guilt. She nurtures friendships that feel like peace. She leans into routines that make her stronger instead of busier. Slowly, the woman who once stood at rock bottom begins to rise, not because her circumstances instantly changed, but because she changed within them. She discovers that rock bottom gave her something she never expected: authority over her own life. She no longer waits for someone to come and save her because she has learned how to save herself. She no longer looks for external rescue because she has found internal resilience. That resilience becomes the cornerstone of her new identity. She walks differently, not with arrogance, but with quiet assurance. She carries the wisdom of someone who has seen darkness and chosen light. She moves with a calm strength that cannot be shaken easily. People may notice the difference, but they may not understand the depth of what it took to become this version of herself. Rock bottom became the ground where she planted the seeds of her transformation. What once felt like a burial became a planting, and as she rises, she knows that she did not just survive her breaking. She used it as a foundation to build the woman she was always meant to be, walking in quiet confidence. After surviving what was meant to destroy her is not about proving anything to anyone, but about embodying a deep inner knowing. There was a time when she fought just to keep her head above water, when every day felt like a battle against fear, disappointment, and exhaustion. She remembers the moments where she almost gave up, the nights when tears soaked her pillow, the days when she smiled in public but felt empty inside. She knows what it feels like to be broken and still have to show up. She knows what it feels like to carry pain silently, because explaining it would only lead to shallow sympathy. But something happened in the midst of that silent fight. A strength began to grow in her spirit, not the kind that needs to be loud, but the kind that is steady and rooted. She realized that her survival was not by accident. Every breath she took in the midst of struggle was forming a deeper layer of resilience inside her. Quiet confidence is not built in moments of praise. It is built in moments of pressure. It is formed in the unseen battles she fought alone. It grows every time she chooses peace over chaos, restraint over reaction, and wisdom over impulse. There is a maturity that rises in her spirit when she stops needing to respond to everything that tries to provoke her. She understands that not every attack deserves her energy. Not every opinion requires her defense. Not every misunderstanding needs her correction. She begins to move differently, with a grace that is powerful yet soft. People may notice that she no longer engages in the same arguments, no longer tries to win the approval of people who never took the time to understand her journey. What they may not realize is that her silence is not weakness, it is mastery. Quiet confidence is the ability to walk into a room without demanding attention, but carrying a presence that cannot be ignored. It is seen in the way she no longer chases opportunities, but attracts them by the strength of her character and the authenticity of her spirit. She does not compete because she knows who she is. She does not rush because she knows what is meant for her cannot be taken. She no longer allows urgency to push her into decisions that do not align with her peace. She is intentional, patient, and deeply aware of her value. She does not waste her time trying to convince others of her worth because she lives from a place of internal assurance. That assurance cannot be shaken by rejection, gossip, or delay. She has learned that being overlooked is not the same as being forgotten. Sometimes it is protection, a divine pause preparing her for what she is being shaped to handle. There is something powerful about a woman who comes back stronger after being counted out. The world expects destruction to leave her bitter, but she chose to let it refine her. They expected her to be angry, but she chose peace. They expected her to stay wounded, but she chose healing. She carries that choice in how she speaks, how she walks, how she loves, and how she leads her life. Her confidence is not loud because it does not need to be. It is quiet because it is secure. It is calm because it is rooted in truth. She is no longer intimidated by the thought of being alone because she discovered her strength there. She is no longer afraid of starting over because she has already proven that she can rebuild from nothing. She is no longer defined by what tried to destroy her because she has risen above it with grace. Quiet confidence is not about perfection. It is about alignment. She has learned to align her actions with her purpose, her boundaries with her self-worth, and her decisions with her peace. She knows that true success is not in how much noise she makes, but in how deeply she lives in her truth. Her glow does not come from being seen. It comes from being whole. People may wonder how she carries herself with such calm certainty after everything she has gone through, but what they do not see are the battles she has already won in private. She does not need to announce her healing because her presence speaks for her. She does not need to justify her growth because her evolution is evident. She simply walks forward, steady and focused, no longer driven by fear, but guided by purpose.